press will be given ample opportunity to talk to folks. We need to clear out and be quiet during the hearing. Committee will be in order. Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Here's the quote. Your public safety as a resident is dramatically impacted by your district attorney and whether he or she is a George Soros-funded rogue prosecutor or a law and order prosecutor, by your police department, and by whether the local politicians support and adequately fund the police and prosecutors' offices. It goes on. This is why the Soros rogue prosecutor movement has concentrated its fire at identifying, recruiting, and funding candidates for local district attorney races. By elevating pro-criminal and anti-victim zealots into office, the rogue prosecutor movement destabilizes the safety of our communities, treats criminals as victims and police as the criminals, and ignores real victims. America's sky-high murder rates, for example, are almost exclusively cabined in cities run by Democrats and with Democrat district attorneys, many of whom are bought and paid for by George Soros. Why are we beginning our crime wave field hearings in New York City? Because this is one of the most egregious examples in America. Alvin Bragg is the poster child for exactly what was just described. Ms. Brame, I want to thank you for your compelling testimony today and sharing the shocking and tragic story of your son, Sergeant Hassan Correa's gang assault and vicious murder by 4 criminals he did not know. In your written statement submitted today, you wrote this. You said, quote, D.A. Bragg has demonstrated over and over again that he has no regard or concern for human life or victims of crime by instituting his ADAs to not prosecute violent recidivists and ultimately release them back to the streets to victimize and terrorize more innocent New Yorkers, unquote. You heard Mr. Nadler and Mr. Kessler and others share their manipulated statistics this morning, suggesting that New York City is, quote, one of the safest big cities in America. But you and other New Yorkers don't agree with that, I know. Mr. Holden just said our people are afraid to go anywhere because this is the worst lawlessness in the city's history. How do you respond to these claims that this is just a magical, safe city right now?
Well, you know, I think that the average New Yorker doesn't care nothing about no statistics, okay? Especially in the black and brown communities. We care about the mothers who have to visit the morgue to identify their dead child's body. We care about the mothers who have to lean into the coffin and watch them lower that top down on that child and they know they'll never see them again. We care about being able to let our child go out to the park and play without getting shot in their stroller. We care about not getting raped in elevators. We don't care nothing about your statistics. You cannot convince us to not believe our lying eyes with your numbers, all right? Because we see it with our very eyes, day in and day out, especially in the poor black and brown communities, where none of you in this room would even step foot in.
Ms. Brame, you're so right. And they're changing the subject. They're doing their best to change the subject here and obscure the facts because the facts are difficult for them to face. The objective fact is that Manhattan has instituted pro-crime, anti-victim policies that have resulted in an increase in violent crime and created this dangerous situation in the community. And in one America's once great cities that was the symbol of freedom and opportunity and liberty. According to the NYPD data, New York City saw a 23% surge in major crimes in 1 year since Alvin Bragg took over. That is the fact. We have a violent crime epidemic here, and everybody in America knows it because we see the videos played out on our television, local news, every single night of what's going on here in the city. I just want to say this, and I'm almost out of time, but I've shared in this committee before the long list of statements from leading Democrats in Congress and the leading Democrats on this very committee who specifically and aggressively called for the defunding of the police. And as a result, in 2020 in New York City, officials cut $1 billion from the police department's 2021 budget. These are the completely foreseeable and obvious effects of these soft-on-crime policies that are advanced by Soros-funded DAs. Alvin Bragg is, in my view, probably the worst offender. And they're trying to manipulate the facts. They're trying to change it. But I thank you all for being here. I yield the remainder of my time.
Committee will be in order. If the gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Almost 3 weeks ago, is the microphone on?
Yeah, just pull it close.
Almost 3 weeks ago, Donald J. Trump was indicted by a grand jury in Manhattan on dozens of counts of fraud in connection with a hush money payment scheme in which his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, previously went to jail. Since the former president's indictment, the Manhattan District Attorney has been the subject of countless death threats and racist diatribes. Others have made ugly appeals to anti-Semitism in an effort to attack the proceedings. And this committee has used every means at its disposal to disrupt, interrupt, and interfere with the prosecution, demanding documents it has no right to obtain and no jurisdiction to demand, subpoenaing a former district attorney, deputy district attorney, and threatening to subpoena the DA himself, and now holding this hearing in Manhattan in a vain attempt to intimidate or embarrass the prosecutorial authority. Now, the majority denies that this is the purpose of today's hearing. They would have you believe it is a mere coincidence that all of a sudden and out of the blue, the chairman decided that the state of New York is a wonderful place to do a hearing. Not the chairman's home state of Ohio with its high rates of murder, but New York State. And of all the cities in New York, they would pick New York City. And of all the boroughs in New York, they pick Manhattan. Apparently, Manhattan is just lovely this time of year. What a remarkable coincidence, we are meant to believe. Of all the gin joints and all the towns in all the world, we just happened to walk into this one. How absurd. Of course, this is not a coincidence at all. Instead, it is the GOP leadership in Congress doing what it has done best for the last 6 years, and that is to act as the criminal defense counsel for Donald J. Trump. Well, let me tell you this.
Capitol Police. Gentlemen will suspend. Capitol Police. Capitol Police will remove the gentleman from the audience.
Let me tell you this.
Gentlemen.
Let me tell you this. Let me tell you this. Donald J. Trump.
Gentlemen will suspend until we got order. Gentlemen will suspend. The audience has to be in order. Capitol Police. Capitol Police. Sir.
Can we have order?
Yeah, we're working on it, Mr. Schiff. Gentlemen, Capitol Police, please remove the gentleman from the audience. No, you got to go. You got to go. I'm sorry. I've given you several warnings. You got to go, unfortunately.
He's from my district.
It was a very unfortunate attack on Ralph Nader.
Committee will be in order. Committee will be in order. The gentleman from California.
Those comments about Ralph Nader are way out of line. Of course, it is not a coincidence that we are here in Manhattan. Instead, it is the GOP leadership in Congress doing what it has done best over the last 6 years, and that is to act as the criminal defense counsel for Donald J. Trump. Well, let me tell you this. Donald Trump doesn't need the lawyers on this committee to be his criminal defense lawyer. He has plenty of those already. Nor is that the role of Congress. Quite the opposite. Our role should be to defend the rule of law, not tear it down. We should be defending the principle that no one is above the law, not attempting to establish a new principle that if you are politically powerful enough, you get a pass. We should be defending the independence of the grand jury and the safety of a public servant enforcing the law, not adding to the dangers to both. The Manhattan District Attorney has the burden of proving Donald Trump guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. A jury of ordinary citizens will have the responsibility of determining whether he has met that burden. that this process will be the same for a former president as it would be for his lawyer or his driver or his doorman or his neighbor is the strength of a democracy, not its weakness. The first thing Chairman Jordan said today was that this hearing is about the administration of justice, but more accurately, it is about an effort to interfere with the administration of justice. He said that here in Manhattan, the scales of justice are being weighed down by politics, and they are, but only today. And by this committee's actions in trying to intimidate the Manhattan DA for having the audacity to believe that in America, being rich, being powerful, even being president of the United States does not entitle you to violate the law with impunity. There was a time in America when both parties used to believe in the rule of law, but sadly those days are over. One of America's two great political parties believes that political might makes right, and more than right, it means that you are beyond the reach of the law and beyond accountability. The more power, the less justice. But this is not democracy. This is the antithesis of democracy. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all of our witnesses being here today. Thank you for sharing your compelling stories. I would just say, Mr. Morgan, after hearing what you've heard today, I think you probably understand why it's real tough to sit down and have a logical, cogent argument on how we might jointly, with nonpartisan affiliation, try to solve some of these problems. What do you think?
And talks about you guys, Republicans, about Trump. Hey, while Trump was in office, he's busy holding hearings trying to get him out for 4 years. So I don't think you have the right to say that you politicized when you were in power. You tried to get Trump out, you couldn't get him out. Let's face reality, you tried. The dossier was a fake, everything what it was. You tried to get him. He was sitting there laughing. That's very nice. And the other Democrats are telling us that we're all props for sitting there. Please don't talk down to us. It's really not nice.
Thanks,
Yes.
Mr. Borg.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to just read some. These are not by a Republican. These aren't from Republican members of this committee. These are just comments here. This is what an individual said. I would add that it's not so much from necessarily federal funding, but it's something that I do want to spend more time on and focus on, and use the plight. Use the pulpit representing the district in public safety. I think a lot of people walk around the city very scared right now, and the violent crime wave is very concerning. This individual also said, I think people are scared to go on the subway in the whole district. I've heard it from all over the place, from the wealthy areas in Tribeca, to Chinatown, to Borough Park, to Sunset Park. I think a lot of people are afraid. He also said, I'm very concerned about the safety in the city. He also said, I've been part of this community defending the victims and trying to protect the public for my whole career, and I think that those experiences resonate with people in different ways for different reasons, close quote. We cannot allow people to just continue to cycle through the system because it's demoralizing to the cops and it gives everyone a perception of danger. He also said, whether or not the data says that it's safe or not, there is a perception in the city that it is not safe, and one of the reasons for that is the perpetual recidivism that is going on, close quote. He also said, quote, you've got people randomly being shot on the subways. You've got people randomly being thrown into car trucks and driven to remote places and shot. There's an insecurity not felt in 25 years. It's scary to me and far away the number one issue, close quote. That didn't come from anybody on this side of the aisle. It didn't even come from any of you at the table. It came from Mr. Goldman over there. We sit in his district. He knows that there's a crime problem. And we've been hearing about a study. Let me refer you to the Heritage study that my colleague referred to, and I ask that it's
Without objection.
Thank you. Quote, when you remove the crime-infested, homicide-riddled cities from the state murder rate featured in the Third Way study, which was co-authored by Mr. Kessler, you dramatically lower the murder rate for that state, upending their conclusions, his conclusions, and exposing the piece for what it really is, a straightforward attempt at political projection dressed up as a study. That's what you've been hearing about to rebut the stories and the facts of the lives of the victims and the witnesses and those who live in this city today. Mr. Holden, why won't your family go take the subway, the mass transit system in this city?
What they've experienced, when my daughter took the subway the other day for the first time, she says, "I'm not going back because I felt unsafe." People talking to themselves, people screaming. It is terrible. And by the way, if you want to cherry pick numbers from the other side, and I'm a Democrat, but I'm against what I've heard about these stats. Downloaded from the NYPD this morning. 25% increase in all the 7 major crimes in New York City in a 2-year period. 26% in the 13-year period for Manhattan North. Manhattan South, 59% increase in a 2-year period in the 7 major crimes, 17% in the 13-year period. For all of New York City, and this again is from NYPD, so cherry pick your own numbers, but this is overall. 45% increase in the 2-year period in crime, in the 7 major crimes, and a 23% in the 13-year. So this is what we're facing, and this is what we go to work, and we fought so hard in the 90s to stop this crime wave that we had in New York City, and we did it. But now it's being rolled back to the bad old days.
Yield back.
I think the gentleman yields back. Let me just, before going to Mr. Cicilline, we've been at this 2 hours. The witness is fine. If any, because we'll keep going. If you need a break, just please let us know. The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 30 seconds to Mr. Goldman from New York.
I appreciate Mr. Biggs' reference to some of the concerns that we have about public safety, because it is something that is shared across the aisle. The problem is that you are using this as a political stunt unrelated to real concerns about public safety around this country. Manhattan has the 6th fewest murders out of the top 50 cities in this country. So we all know why you're here. So don't play the political games. You want to have a meaningful conversation? Let's talk. I yield back.
I want to thank the witnesses for being here today and, of course, sharing some very painful stories about your loss. I want to start by emphasizing that keeping Americans safe is one of the most, if not the most important responsibilities that we have in government. It's one of our most important callings as lawmakers. And I was mayor of a city and presided over the lowest crime rate in 30 years, serving as a public safety commissioner. So I understand this very deeply. But my colleagues, sadly, are not here to meaningfully work on public safety solutions. This hearing was called for a purpose: to intimidate a district attorney for doing his job and upholding the rule of law. And you know how I know this? Because our colleagues consistently vote against laws that would increase public safety and ignore facts on what actually decreases crime. Gun violence is now the leading cause of death of children in America. And it kills 40,000 Americans a year.
We need to be in order.
And yet my colleagues...
The gentleman suspend just for a second.
I'd ask that the clock stop,
Yes,
please.
clock stop. We'll be happy to do that. We need to stop the conversations over here. The gentleman... Gentleman deserves to be heard. The committee guests will please refrain from talking and chatting so that Mr. Cicilline can make his presentation and ask his questions. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gun violence is now the leading cause of death of children in America and kills 40,000 Americans a year. Yet my colleagues vote repeatedly against even the most common sense gun violence prevention measures. They vote against getting assault weapons off the streets, despite the previous assault weapons ban that drastically reduced gun violence. They vote against alerting people to active shooters. They vote against safe storage and red flag laws. They vote against community-based crime prevention programs. They vote against background checks. And the list goes on and on. And more than that, they brought us here today to attack a district attorney who has actually seen a decrease in violent crime during his tenure, all because he dared to hold Donald Trump accountable. So please spare me this suggestion that this is about a sincere interest in finding solutions to crime. This is about your agenda to earn the admiration and support and good wishes of the former President of the United States. But I, for one, would actually like to hear about some actual solutions to public safety, and particularly to gun violence in our communities. And that brings me to my first question. Ms. Fisher, how do our gun laws, or lack thereof, contribute to America's gun violence epidemic? And is the rate of gun violence in this country and the rate of gun death comparable in any other developed country in the world?
Thank you, Representative. The gun violence rate in the United States is 26 times higher than every other high-income country. So we are comparatively a much more dangerous place to live. And though violent crime, and I strongly push forward that gun violence is violent crime and should be considered as a part of this hearing, violent crime is going down in New York City according to law enforcement's own data. However, we could be doing so much more to ensure that New Yorkers are protected and all Americans are protected by enacting comprehensive universal background checks, by having a licensing system and requiring a permit to purchase. We could also be banning the assault weapons that are most commonly used in mass shootings that are killing our children every day.
And one of the things that I think that Congress has a responsibility to look at, although we don't have jurisdiction over state criminal prosecutions, obviously, or local prosecutions, what is the evidence with respect to the focus on exclusively arrest and incarceration, but how do we prevent crimes? What are the good strategies? Because, frankly, by the time someone's a victim of a crime, we've already failed. Our goal should be to prevent crime. So what does the evidence say with respect to those two different strategies?
We need to be investing in prevention, largely because there's so many guns that are being trafficked from out of state. We need to be investing in our communities. And that's with resources towards community violence intervention strategies and prevention programs, including in schools, more trauma support for victims, more resources, better housing, all of those issues in terms of the inequities that are impacting especially impoverished Black and brown communities in this country and in this city need to be addressed as a public health crisis, and we need to be investing in prevention.
Thank you. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman, Ms. Tiffany is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DiGiacomo, would you rather have sympathy for the police, or would you rather have respect from elected leaders?
Well, respect and sympathy. It's a very difficult time. In my 40 years now, this is probably the most difficult time in policing that I've ever seen. But, yeah, you know, respect is important, of course.
Do soft on crime policies lead to less gun violence?
I believe so, yes.
So you believe going soft on crime is going to cause there to be less gun violence in your city?
No, not less. Soft on crime is going to cause more gun violence.
Okay, I'll state it this way then. Do soft on crime policies lead to more gun violence?
Yes.
Ms. Harrison and Ms. Brame, the ranking member said this city is safer. Is this city safer in your mind, Ms. Harrison?
No, I have a lot of friends through my advocacy that live here that are considering moving their entire families.
Ms. Brame, is this city safer under District Attorney Bragg?
Absolutely not. There's all kinds of criminal elements roaming the street, free to do whatever they want.
Mr. Holden, the District Attorney's Office conceded they used $5,000 in federal funds, which are authorized by us here, for purposes other than fighting violent crime here in Manhattan. Do you agree with the District Attorney's decision to do that?
No, I don't. And I disagree with most of what D.A. Bragg's is about, especially the soft on crime. But what's happened in New York City, the reason why our crime, and it's not going down, it's going up if you look at the trends. We have the lowest incarceration rate of any major city in the United States. I'll repeat that. The lowest incarceration rate of, let's say, 40 of the biggest cities. New York City has the lowest. And that's because Mayor de Blasio, before Mayor Adams, started releasing everyone from jail. So, of course, crime was going to go up, and it skyrocketed in 2020. So that's the reason. We still, I believe, we have to arrest more people. D.A. Bragg will disagree. And they should go to jail when they commit a crime.
So, Mr. Holden, in regards to so there's this federal funding that comes in and it's not being used to fight violent crime. Is it, as an elected representative, do you view it as inappropriate that those of us that are responsible for those dollars going to fighting crime, using federal funds, is it inappropriate for us to review how those dollars are being spent?
Yes, certainly we should review it, yes.
Mr. Holden, have you been asked to be on any of the major networks to deliver your message? Have you been asked, for example, to be on CNN to deliver your message?
I've been asked, not from CNN, but I have been asked on other major networks, yes.
And you've shared those comments. Ms. Brame, Ms. Harrison, have you been asked to be on one of the major networks to tell your story?
Not CNN.
Ms. Harrison.
No, not CNN, not MSNBC. They refuse to even acknowledge that victims are a part of this hearing.
So let's talk about, we hear percentages. Time after time we're hearing percentages. In 2022, as a result of a 7% increase in rapes, that's 110 more people that got raped here in New York City. Those are almost all women, I'm sure. 110 people. Auto theft, 3,256 more carjackings here in New York as a result of this soft on crime. Transit crimes, people being pushed off from subways, right? 521 more people. 521 more people. 30% more? That's 521 more people. That's what we're seeing, ladies and gentlemen. These are real people that are being harmed. I just want to conclude with this, Mr. Chairman. I'm so glad we're having this first hearing in New York, but I want you to come to my state. I want you to come to Milwaukee, where we had a district attorney. Here's his quote when he started out. Is there going to be an individual I divert or put into a treatment program who's going to go out and kill somebody? You bet. Milwaukee has 10% of the population, and they have 25% of the crime. Mr. Kessler, that's the problem, is the Soros prosecutors are not doing their job. And in Wisconsin, now we've got a Soros Supreme Court justice. The people of Wisconsin better hang on, because violent crime is going to get worse. Come to Milwaukee, Mr. Chairman, for the next hearing.
Gentlemen's time's expired. Ms. Scanlon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Our constituents elect us to make their lives better. They send us to Washington to work on the issues that impact American families, whether it's health care, jobs, the cost of prescription drugs, infrastructure, clean air and water, climate rescue, and of course, safe communities and schools. But every day in Congress, we are seeing the right-wing extremists who control the House failing all of us, choosing publicity over progress, choosing politics over people, and choosing protecting the disgraced and now indicted former president rather than protecting our democracy. Today, at the urging of the former president and his lawyers, the chairman has dragged the entire House Judiciary Committee to New York, inserting the federal government into a purely state and local matter with no credible pretense of jurisdiction. And he's making the American taxpayer, and especially the New Yorkers, who he claims to be so concerned about, making those taxpayers pay for this foolishness. This isn't governance. It's not working for the American people. It's grandstanding. It's a stunt. Just look at all the cameras here. And every second of it is preventing us from being able to do the real work that the people who elected us expect us to do in Congress. To our witnesses here today who've shared their pain and trauma in being victims of crime and violence, I am so sorry for the impact that has had on you and your families. Anyone listening to you has to be moved by what you've experienced. And I applaud your courage in trying to take that pain and move to change things going forward. But I fear that you have been re-victimized by this hearing, because this hearing is not going to provide that change. It's not a serious effort to make our communities safer. Our Republican colleagues aren't in New York City to prevent crime. They're here to protect someone who's been charged with committing crimes. And how do we know that? Look at the time, place, and manner of this hearing. We know that the timing isn't a coincidence, because as soon as it became obvious that the Manhattan District Attorney was getting ready to charge Mr. Trump with crimes, Mr. Trump's lawyers sent a letter to the chairman telling him to use the full powers of Congress to go after the Manhattan DA. We know that the place is important because the choice of place for this hearing isn't a coincidence. It's about protecting Mr. Trump because it's being held in the city where Mr. Trump was indicted and arrested just 2 weeks ago. If this hearing were focused on fighting crime, as several people have mentioned, there are other jurisdictions that have much higher rates of crime. And as to the manner of this hearing, we know that it's about protecting Mr. Trump because it's being led by the disgraced former president's closest allies, the ones who benefit the most if he can beat the criminal charges here in New York, or if they can intimidate the Manhattan DA or the other prosecutors across the country who are investigating other alleged crimes. Crime prevention is a serious topic, and it deserves serious discussion, but that's not what this hearing is about. Instead, we're seeing a circus, a performance by partisan politicians who've hitched their wagons to the Trump train. So I and my colleagues refuse to sit idly by while families across this country, from Alabama to Louisville to Nashville to Uvalde to Buffalo to Boulder, while they're mourning the loss of their loved ones to gun violence. We stand ready to pass legislation to address the serious issues facing all Americans if our Republican colleagues will let us. Now, Ms. Fisher, you and several others have mentioned the Iron Pipeline, the route through which many of the crime guns in states like New York and Pennsylvania are acquired. Just last year, the ATF intercepted 400 illegal guns from southern states that were being sent to my community in Philadelphia. Can you speak to the impact of lax gun laws in states that lack more specific gun laws, the impact that it has on gun violence is in cities like New York and Pennsylvania, Philadelphia?
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative. Because traffickers are able to easily and illegally obtain guns in states with weak gun laws like Florida or Georgia or the Carolinas, they are able to easily purchase lots of guns and traffic them into neighborhoods that have been disproportionately impacted by